My workday turned out to be horribly difficult, and I had to walk home sleepy and tired because my car broke down, and taking the subway, well, my status wouldn't allow it. Okay, that was a silly joke. I just hadn't seen the starry sky and breathed the fresh July air for a long time, even though it was September outside. If only I had known how my walk would end, I would have called a taxi right away. I walked past tall, stylish buildings. Inhaling the city smells a big city for big people had to look accordingly. Countless lights flashed around, numerous cars rushed past, couples in love and business people walked through me, and I could smell their perfumes, catch snippets of speech. I regretted more than once that I rarely experienced such things. I walked, dissolving into the September atmosphere, the cool night air always smelling of smoke. Yes, there are no bonfires in a big city, but my childhood was spent in a village where I was born and lived until I finished school and moved away. Therefore, autumn will always smell like smoke, evenings will be warm, and nights cool and clear. Suddenly, I was distracted from my nostalgia. The reason was the realization of the complete absence of that white noise that surrounded me, immersing me in memories. I must have taken a wrong turn, so at first I wanted to go back, but my navigator showed that I was still heading home. I had never walked through this park, moreover. I had never walked home. With my schedule, there was no time for walks, so the car and the map were my friends and helpers. The further I walked into the park, the more uneasy I felt. Apparently, my lifestyle had significantly dulled my survival instinct if I didn't call a taxi at the first thought that something was off. I noticed another detail: there was no sound at all. Not even the sound of my steps. That's when I remembered that absolute silence is characteristic only of the deaf, so I turned around and quickly walked towards the park exit. The further I went, the closer I heard the strumming of a guitar and some noises. And when I reached the supposed source of the music, I saw her, a woman in a red dress. She was dancing, her red heels clicking on the paved path, her movements mesmerizing me. I stood and watched her, just watched, and when my legs started aching painfully, I simply sat on the ground. She kept dancing, twirling around me, and suddenly she stopped. She just stood behind me, and I, exhausted by fatigue, looked somewhere into the distance. I woke up on the ground. It was the same night, the same street. I was surrounded by several people, answering my questions about what had happened. With short, you felt unwell, and you fell and have been lying here for about 15 minutes. I remembered nothing, just a thought about some girl kept spinning in my head, but who she was, if I knew her, or if she even existed, remained a mystery. The first thing my nose smelled after the ammonia was the scent of grave soil and some kind of rot. My face twisted, but no one else seemed to notice, so I dared to ask, "Do you smell that?" People started sniffing but didn't catch anything. Someone asked, "Do you need an ambulance?" to which I shook my head and asked instead to call a taxi. A man in the crowd dialed a number and began dictating the address. I wasn't particularly good with location coordination, but the address he gave the taxi driver. That street was on the other side of the city, quite far from my work, not to mention my home. How I ended up there was a big mystery to me, and I blamed it on the man's mistake. But the taxi that appeared a couple of minutes later convinced me of the reality of what was happening. 5 minutes later, I was already sitting in the yellow car, racing to the other end of the city, to my home. Various scenarios ran through my mind. Maybe I was kidnapped and thrown as far away from home as possible. Or maybe I just got drunk and went the wrong way? No, nonsense. I would smell of alcohol, and in case of a kidnapping, they could have hit me or stolen something. But I felt great, and everything valuable was with me. Not even dirty. The more I tried to find an adequate answer to one question, instead of the last one, 3 similar ones arose. It was confusing. To pass the time, I took out my phone and wrote to my friend. He could answer any question, and it didn't matter whether his nonsense was logically explained or touched on more mystical, I would even say mythical, supernatural things. Any option suited me. I was dying of boredom and incomprehension at the same time. As always, I was right. My friend immediately read my rather strange message and quickly sent a link to some legend, asking if this was the woman I saw. I clicked on the link, and one of those sites appeared where fortune tellers and psychics peddle their paranormal crap to ordinary mortals. I even remembered my grandmother, who at one time taught me this nonsense, nostalgia. As usual, such sites always have sections with fortune telling and legends, where I ended up. The yellow headline on the dark brown background was quite simple: Deadhead. I expected to read some horror story in the style of an ancient spirit from American Russian Germany that kills virgin souls, but what followed was a rather simple short story without colorful details. Deadhead, or the woman in the red dress, this is how the restless soul is often called, which visits our world to this day. She comes to our world to quench her hunger and drag another unfortunate soul to the grave. Her legend says that she was a poor dancer whose husband died, followed by her little son, which she could not survive, and going mad, stabbed herself on their grave exactly 1 year later, on the day of her wedding with her beloved, September 21st. And then I began to remember the park, the red dress, the dance. The woman fit my image. I never believed in mysticism, but I was intrigued. I paid attention to the date, September 21st. I had seen it somewhere. Damn, it's today. Yes, a brilliant discovery, but what could I do? I didn't remember anything that had happened to me throughout that day. The information I had seen wasn't enough, so I wrote to my friend that I found some resemblance between the girl in the park and the woman from the legend. He didn't reply, sending me a few more links instead. I decided to leave them for later. The taxi driver's voice distracted me, and after paying him, I got out of the car. As I made my way to the apartment, I opened the first link, where there was more information. It took me about half an hour to study all the information provided to me. In short, I learned that Maria, that was the woman's name, comes once a year, on the day she killed herself, first appearing in a dream or vision to her victim in the form of a living, dancing girl. Her victims stabbed themselves with the same dagger she used, thus binding themselves to her through blood, which is somewhat similar to a sacrificial offering. I delved into this matter but quickly lost interest. I wanted to sleep again, and the story once more seemed implausible due to the facts mentioned above, so I left it until the next morning and went to sleep, thinking that in case of anything, I would go to the police, and spirits are a fiction. But I didn't sleep for long. I woke up in a cold sweat because I had that woman in my dream again. But this time, she wasn't as beautiful and wasn't dancing. A decayed, somehow not decomposed body of a greenish-brown color in a piece of red tattered cloth, only vaguely resembling a dress, stood swaying occasionally and staring at me with empty eye sockets. Bones protruded here and there. A wreath of very dried old roses, which crumbled at the slightest movement, adorned her head. She wore red shoes, dirty with soil. She was all covered in soil. In her right hand she held a dagger. Then, just a moment later, her hideous face appeared right in front of me. I jumped out of bed and went to the kitchen. Damn, too realistic a dream, which I tried to forget by washing my face a couple of times with cold water. I admit, I was scared. Too many coincidences and realism. I had never encountered such a thing before. I was afraid of what I had dreamed, and because of this, I stayed in the kitchen for a while to calm down. When I returned to the room, I saw something my eyes refused to believe. A dagger, the one the monster held in my dream, was lying on my pillow. I froze. My brain completely stopped working, and my body stopped obeying me. My legs led me to the bed, and I picked up that terrible thing. At that moment, the door behind me slammed shut. I wanted to run, wanted to throw the dagger away, but nothing worked. The stupid body was no longer mine in some sense, and I kept standing there. I heard a rasping sound behind me, and my trembling hand moved slightly away, as if aiming where to thrust the gleaming blade. Then I turned. Tears even flowed from my eyes. I didn't want to die, but what I saw killed hope in an instant. That woman stood before me. The smell of decay hit my nose, and her hand pushed mine, and I felt the steel pierce my heart. Christ, I muttered to myself, as the first flakes of snow started to fall. They gathered in fuzzy clumps over the windshield before my wipers cleared them away. I'd been waiting for 20 minutes now in my sister's driveway. Had I chosen to wait inside with her, I'd have been dead by now thanks to her 2 gray cats. Cute little devils, but murder to my sinuses. Puffy eyes and a clogged-up throat, that's just what I needed. Every Christmas, our family made the annual trip to my grandparents' cabin tucked away in the woods of Hope, Alaska, and I'd hoped to beat the heavy snowfall that was forecasted. Since my sister's license was suspended from a DUI, here I was a hostage to time with my finger tapping anxiously on the steering wheel. When my mother had asked me to be the one to grab my sister, I had honestly dreaded it from the start. It wasn't that we hated one another, we just weren't as close anymore. After decades of constant arguments and bitter disagreements, we became distant and our relationship fizzled. Yes, we were siblings, but it felt more accurate to call us the residue of what siblings once were. Finally, like the gates of Valhalla, her front door opened, and out she came. Her hair was forest green. The last time I'd seen her, it had been white. The time before that, it was violet. Got everything I asked, as she clambered her way into the passenger seat. She responded, as she adjusted her glasses and stuffed a few bags in the back seat. And just like that, we were off. Hope was about a 30-minute drive, and it didn't take long for the awkward silence to inflate between us. It didn't help that the radio didn't work in my car, and that the broken auxiliary port made your music sound like it was having a seizure. By the time we reached the turnoff for Hope Highway, the road was turning into a thick white sheet. Thankfully, on Christmas Eve night, the long stretch to Hope's small community was quick and vacant. The cabin was tucked away in a fortress of trees 5 miles off the main road. As I made the turn, my sister cracked the window, pulled out a blunt, and lit it with her lighter. "Want a hit?" she asked. Snow crunched beneath us. "Not while I'm driving." "It's a straight path. We're practically there already." She took a drag and blew it out the window. "I want to just focus on this, all right." She huffed and pushed up her glasses. "If you're that worried, maybe slow down a bit then." There was the jab, a piece of bait to lure me into another fight. But I wasn't going to bite, not this time. She could live with us getting there faster. The drive was almost over, and soon I'd be in a warm living room with my feet up, a spiked eggnog in my hand and Bobby Helms' Jingle Bell Rock in the air. I could already hear Uncle Jed spouting off one of his crude jokes, "Why does Santa Claus have such a big dude?" My sister shrieked, jabbing a finger in my side and whipping my mind back to the windshield. The car had just finished winding around the thick trail. The large body of a reindeer stood in our path. Eyes wide open and blank, it didn't move as the high beams found it. Snapped into a panic, I twisted the wheels in a desperate swerve. The car veered greasily to the side in a fine spray of slosh. The reindeer, also known as a caribou, remained still, even as the bumper soared inches from its nose. We came to a crunching halt off the main path. "Jesus," I sighed, blessed with relief. "Did we hit it?" "No," my sister said, leaning out the window to check, while exhaling another plume of smoke. I wound the steering wheel back around and pressed on the gas. The wheels shrilled in place, kicking up globs of sleet but not moving an inch. "Perfect," I moaned and unfolded myself from the seat to check it out. The 2 front tires were caked in black slush and practically swallowed in a mound of snow. I kicked at it, trying to clear off the icy debris from the treads and beneath the wheel well. When that tired me out, I resorted to scraping it off with my fingers. "Screw off, Prancer," I heard my sister call toward the dark silhouette of the reindeer, its antlers like gnarled fingers reaching for the treetops. Then she made a sort of startled yip, followed by a "what the fuck?" I looked up from the scrim of snow. The reindeer was now standing tall on both of its hind legs. It looked strange, like a silly caricature you'd see in a kid's book. But out there in the silence of the woods, it was a creepy image. The way its vague shape stood on just two legs held an almost human-like balance. For whatever reason, I realized then it didn't have a tail. Its muscular neck craned to the side and let out an ululating scream, a miserable squeal of metal grinding against metal. My legs were ice sculptures, cementing me to the spot as the shriek quieted to a succession of wet grunts. The reindeer dropped down to its original posture and stomped heavily. Puffs of white vapor and strings of snot vented from its nostrils. I was no hunter, but it didn't take a lot to tell when a pissed-off animal was about to charge. I leaped for the driver's seat, pulled the door open, and slammed it shut just as the muffled thud of hooves reached me. Antlers scraped the door as its large body practically flew over the patch I had just been standing in. Fast, very fast. My sister screamed as the large bulk of its fame wound back around and charged again, this time shattering the headlights and submerging us in darkness. "Just go already," my sister hollered in my ear. "I'm trying, goddammit," I hissed. The wheels continued to spin helplessly. We were trapped. The creature charged again, this time nailing the window. A cobweb of cracks bloomed near my sister's head. I searched for anything, literally anything that I could use as a weapon. I was never really a gun enthusiast, but at that moment I'd have shaved my head and joined the secular monks if it meant having a Glock in my hand right then and there. After rattling the car once more, the reindeer finally appeared to lose interest and disappeared amidst the cluster of trees. Granted some time to breathe and think, we phoned our dad and told him about the situation. He was going to come down in his pickup and get us unstuck and out of this mess. I looked over at my sister, who was taking long and steady breaths between her fingers. "Are you all right?" I asked. "What do you think?" she grumbled. "I told you to slow down." Another jab, and this time I wasn't going to have it. "You want to be useful," I yelled. "Get out there and push." "No." "Then shut the hell up. I don't need it right now." She said nothing else, and neither did I, returning once again to the pocket of silence that our relationship succumbed to. The sooner Dad's headlights peaked in the distance, the better. Suddenly, she rolled the window down. "What are you doing?" I asked. "SSS," she pursed her lips. "Just listen." Humoring her, I waited, and sure enough, the sound reached me too. The quiet voice of a little girl coming from outside. "Somebody," it whimpered. "I'm lost. Please help me, I'm lost." My sister unlocked the door and motioned to open it. I grabbed her wrist. "What are you doing?" she snapped. "There's someone out there." "Just wait a second." "It's weird, isn't it?" The voice continued to whine, choking between sobs and pleading for someone, anyone, to help her. I didn't like the way it sounded. The same lasting drawl between words, the same weeping sounds, like someone was hitting repeat on a speaker. Something wasn't right, and my instincts were hoisting red flags left and right. Then my sister looked at me, and her expression warped into shock. She flung back, pinning both shoulders against the interior. Things that sounded like words bubbled up but didn't quite make it out of her throat. I turned and saw what was looking at me. It had the face of a man, surrounded by the mottled fur of a caribou's body. The skin was a mummified brown color, wound tightly around its long skull like old, crinkled leather. Snowflakes landed upon its wide, expressionless eyes and melted into the dark membranes of its pupils. It circled the car, bobbing its antlers and fogging up the windows as it peered inside. My heart shook the walls of my throat. I locked eyes with my sister, unable to say anything behind the sheer disbelief. I should have grabbed my phone, snapped a photo, recorded a video. Anything, but my thoughts were jangled. It then let out that same horrible scream, but I didn't see its tight, contorted lips open. The sound was coming from its neck. Small, fleshy orifices, flapping open like mouths, were converting the high-pitched shrill into the mimicked cry of a little girl. "Help me, I'm lost. Help me." Headlights glazed the area. My father's pickup came into view, paving its way down the path. The reindeer, or whatever the fuck it was, ran off, vanishing once again into the snow-covered thicket. Nobody believed us. Why would they? If anybody had told me that story, I would have assumed they were hopped up on some crazy psychedelic. But the reality of what I saw was cold, and it's something I still to this day can't fully swallow. Instead of sleeping that night, my sister and I did some research that led us to the myth of skinwalkers, beings of some sort, capable of mimicking voices and disguising themselves as animals to lure people into the woods. After reading other accounts, there wasn't a doubt in my mind what we'd witnessed out there. Every so often that night, I'd stare out the window and eye the yard, wondering if I'd see that leathery face watching from the tree line. Neither I nor my sister ever made that trip again, much to the frustration of my family. But there was a silver lining. She and I have never been closer.